Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It is really great to be here in a room of people. I'm an extrovert. This is awesome. I'm excited. I'm really glad that you all are joining us for this conversation of leading by example, restoring the American dream. At the Bush Institute, we believe very, very keenly in this connection between the quality of education a young person has access to and the opportunity then afforded to them into adulthood. We see that link borne out when we're looking at big data sets, big outcome data sets. We see it borne out in anecdotes when we talk to people around the country. And we think it's really important to pay attention to that link when we're designing policy, not just education policy, but economic policy. And it really matters when we're allocating public dollars. If you've been paying attention, there's a lot of money right now coming down into states and districts around mitigating the impact of COVID. How are we making decisions to think about that money that keeps people on path for an opportunity? That's part of what we'll talk about in this conversation with South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. So Senator Scott is a purpose-driven optimist. He is a man of deep faith, which you'll see in this conversation. And he himself, his life is that anecdote, that story, that link between education and opportunity. At a key point as a youngster, he got access to a better school, and it transformed his path as an adult, and he'll talk a little bit about that. We cover a lot of ground in this 25-minute conversation, but there's three things I'd ask you to listen for. Number one, his take on what it means to have an equity position in this idea of America. Second, what he thinks is the closest thing to magic we have available to us from a policy perspective. And third, what he thinks the federal government's role really should be in job creation and workforce development. There will not be a quiz, although if you were in my 8th grade social studies class circa 1996, that probably would have been your homework to come back with that. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I'll see you again on the other side. Thanks. Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for joining us for the Bush Center's Forum on Leadership. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Ann. Happy day.
Exactly. All right, so in preparing for this conversation with you about leading by example and restoring the American dream, I spoke to a friend of yours, and I asked him what made you so effective as an elected official and a leader. So he told me two things. You can see if he got it right. So the first answer he gave us was the senator has a moral compass that does not let him embarrass his mother. And the second is that he has a mission statement to positively impact 1 billion people over your life that isn't just a soundbite, that it's something you really think about when you're talking about impact and if you're getting it right. So did your friend get that right? Do you think that what makes you effective?
My friend certainly got it right. Certainly, I would say, I would only add to that, faith is a very important part of it. The concept of integrity and character, and why I try to do what it is that I do comes from Matthew 25. And verse 21, hopefully, well done, my good and faithful servant. So taking care of the most vulnerable is a part of my faith DNA.
Excellent. Well, with that as our frame, we'll dive into some policy questions then. So why don't we start with what drew you to public service initially and what keeps you here? You served originally at the county level, the state level, now in the U.S. Congress. So tell us what drew you in.
You know, early on in life, I was a hopeless kid that was frustrated, angry, and disillusioned about what was possible in my life. I grew up in a single-parent household, mired in poverty. Mom worked 16 hours a day. And for much of my youth, I really didn't see the value of trying hard. And I had the good fortune as a sophomore in high school to meet a Chick-fil-A operator who started teaching me that all things were possible for all kids anywhere in America. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you're from. You have to first be willing to look in the mirror and take responsibility for where you are. And second, don't look to get, look to give. And he said one of the ways that you can do that even as a poor kid is to look for ways to invest in public service. And that really led me to this place of running for office. I first started off as a as a volunteer on campaigns and a volunteer on election day, working the polls. And that really kind of whetted my appetite for this journey that I've been on. It's embedded in the Luke 6:38 concept that it's better to give than receive. And if you give, it shall be given unto you in good measure, pressed down, shaken together. So I really took that as a serious challenge from my mentor, who really transformed the way I saw myself and the way that I saw my future.
So when, now that you're in it, and you've been in it for a while, right? You know,
Yeah.
I was an American Studies major. I love the idea of America, democracy, our unique republic. And now you've seen the reality of it, right? Sometimes it's a little rough. So what
It's
keeps
a little different.
what keeps you committed as an elected official and keeps you in the fight?
Well, one thing that helps me a lot is that mission statement that my friend referred to. My mentor died at 38 years old. He was a young fellow. I was 19 years old. His mission statement was to positively impact 1 million people. And not even knowing what 1 billion was when I was 19 years old,
Yeah.
I decided I would take his mission statement and try to live out my personal mission, his mission, and honor my mom at the same time. And so keeping my focus on why I am where I am is really helpful. One of my mentors taught me that the stronger your why, the clearer your what, and the easier your how. And so when times get really hard and really difficult, when there's so much negativity or toxicity in this place called DC, I focus back on the one simple concept that I am here for a purpose. This is my mission. It will not always be fun. I will not always be happy, but there is joy at the end of this journey.
Yeah, that's great. Well, our conversation today is about restoring the American dream.
Yes.
And you can define that a few different ways, I think, depending on your perspective and your history. How do you define what the American dream is?
Well, for my mother, she would say that the American dream that she got from her mother was to do better than the last generation. And so for me, I say I'm living my mother's American dream because in many ways, her dream was for both of her boys growing up in that single parent household to do better than she did. She gave us this concept of dignity in all work. She was a nurse's aide, which is basically very similar to being close to being a part of the janitorial staff sometimes.
Sure.
They do the lowest job in the hospital from a nursing perspective and work very long hours for very low pay. But she said there's dignity in all work. So part of the American dream to me is being a part of something greater than yourself. Her mission did not simply stop with her two boys. She wanted her community to see examples of people working hard, working long, and believing that one day it would all be worth it. And she says what makes it worth it to her is where myself, where I am, and where my brother is. He finished as a command sergeant major after 32 years in the Army. And she believes that our success isn't in our titles, it's in the journey itself. And so the American dream, from my perspective, is being part of something greater than ourselves. If you're looking for a tangible answer, it could be home ownership. It could be business. It's having an equity position in this thing called America. And I believe that is one of the most motivating things on earth, is playing the game, driving towards a destination that's not about you.
Yep. The equity position in America is a great way to sort of make that idea very succinct. So let's use that and talk a little bit about policy. So you have created an opportunity agenda. A big piece of that, obviously, is your work around opportunity zones, which you pushed for in the 2017 tax reform package. But tell us about what your opportunity agenda includes. It's more than opportunity zones, and sort of how that connects with your idea of compassionate conservatism and how we should think about opportunity.
Well, one of the major pillars of the opportunity agenda starts with education. Education really is foundational. I've often said and will continue to say that we need quality education in every zip code in America. If we focus on quality education, we are on the right path. Second, I would say, is we need to invest in apprenticeship programs and workforce development. Part of the challenge that we have as a nation is making sure that we are prepared for the gig economy, that the industrial revolution and the agricultural society, those two are in our rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Our future is technology. And to the extent that we are lifelong learners, you are starting to crystallized and the opportunity agenda is coming into focus. You need to start with education, but you have to commit yourself to being a lifelong learner. And then that requires, if you start at education, you end with lifelong learning. In the middle is having those job skills that allow you to be competitive in a global economy, which means that we have to focus on workforce development, even beyond the K through 12 or college or graduate school. You have to focus on it forever.
Yeah. Yes, it's not like you'd work for the same company for 30 plus years, you get your watch, you sort of move on to the next phase, right? Life looks very different, I think, for everyone now. Go ahead.
And that's a really good point, because if you think about where we are, when my grandfather retired from the shipyard, he had worked basically at 2 or 3 jobs. But once he became an adult, 25 until he retired, it was all at the same company. They say today the average worker will have more than 11 jobs, more than 11 employers, more than 11 independent contracts. Literally, the concept of work is transforming before our very eyes.
Yes, absolutely. So as you think about, let's talk about that a little bit. As we're moving through and beyond COVID, hopefully, right? We know thousands of people have been enormously disrupted, faced incredible, devastating loss. And for many people, they are trying to figure out how to get back to work. What does life look like now, sort of in the post-COVID phase? And when you think about strong workforce readiness policy, some of the things you were talking about lifelong learning, what do you think could help us get back on our feet, America get back on its feet in a post-COVID world?
Well, I think the first one is intangible. We have to believe that the best is still to come.
Yeah.
Too often we hear a lot of naysayers, a lot of doomsday predictions. The truth is that we have overcome a civil war, the Jim Crow South. We've overcome the decline of the 1987 Black Monday. We've been able to overcome conflict in Korea, Vietnam, 2 world wars. Our nation is very resilient. So we have to remind ourselves consistently that we are going to be fantastic. The second thing we have to do is then design an economy. I call it the incentive-based economy. We have to inspire and encourage people to do all that they can in investing in this economy while the recovery is still fragile. Getting earlier investors in this economy will prove to be in our best interest. I look forward to the 3rd and 4th quarter of this year, where we're going to have the most incredible comeback that we have ever seen as a nation. We will see not only double-digit, but high-teen or early 20 GDP growth. This economy has been waiting for a long time to explode, and it's going to happen. But if we're going to do it right, we're going to have to make sure that the incentives in our economic strategy focuses on getting resources off the sidelines and investing long-term into the structural changes that will be necessary for us to be competitive in a gig economy that will take this country and the world by storm.
So let's talk a little bit about those incentives, right? I think there are. What do you think the federal government should do to help incentivize that? What needs to come from the private sector or the states? Sort of where do you see who should play what role in those incentives that could really set us up for success?
Well, from a federal perspective, the federal government has a primary responsibility of setting the rules of the road and then staying out of the way. The government does not create jobs. We keep thinking that we do. We never have, and we never will. I mean, we certainly hire government employees, but that may actually take away more jobs than we create in the private sector. So we'd have a long debate about that. But truth be told, the federal government should set the rules of the road. And part of those rules should be incentives to get capital off the sidelines and make it active capital. The second thing we should do is have the type of tax structure that allows for us to be competitive globally and here at home. When you think about the OECD, our competition, their tax rates are around 19% from our competitors. We are today at 21%. The Biden administration wants us at 28%, which is an anti-competitive position that destroyed jobs by itself. And frankly, what we should do is continue to lower our taxes to bring home. We need to insource bring those jobs back to America. And that incentive-based economy does that if you have the right tax structure and the right tax incentives to bring jobs in our pipeline, the PPE pipeline, bring that home by encouraging companies to relocate in some of the opportunity zones. I have legislation that would help us do that. And then you have to have the right retraining of the current workforce for the future of work. If we focus our attention on doing that, I think we would find ourselves in a very highly competitive position. And then finally, what we can do from the federal perspective is to make sure that we are focusing long-term and not short-term. Immediate gratification is a challenge. That's what it looks like today with the last $2 trillion package.
Yeah.
That was not a COVID relief package. That was more about immediate gratification to those parts of the liberal agenda that allows for the rest of their policies to move forward. We have to be in a better position than that. We have to think about the regulatory responsibility that sets to play a field, the game itself, allows all competitors to be on that field playing by the same rules consistently. In the private sector, we have to invest our capital in such a way that our returns are not tomorrow, but that they are 4 to 6 years away. We need to make sure that this time of easy money, the interest rates at 0%, that we are once again reinvesting in infrastructure and looking at the challenges of 2030 and not 2020 and 2021. If we do that in the private sector and we have the right rules of the road in the public forum sector, we'll have the kind of economy that lasts a long time, as opposed to accelerating all the decisions to the next 2 years. That's what happens when you have a lot of glut of money on the surface. People start trying to make progress today, but they're making decisions that they would make long-term. They're making them all immediately. That may overheat the economy and lead to some challenges that we were not able to predict at the beginning of this recovery.
So it sounds like a little discipline and some vision will serve us well. In this, we talk about that a lot in education. There's $190 billion, right, coming down into states and school districts with limited guidance, right? That's a lot of money to spend quickly, and I think that we're asking a lot of people to make some hard decisions under political pressure.
And you're 100% right. I was talking to some friends in school districts, and they say we have $170 million to spend over the next 2 years, and we have no idea what we're going to do with this money. And we can't have any recurring expenses because the dollars aren't recurring. Therefore, we're going to have to do something that is one time only. It's almost like having $170 million of grants and realizing that whatever you do the first time, you can't do it the second time or the third time or the fourth time. It is a poor way of spending money. And then what we did in December, there's still, I think the utilization is under 10%. So out of all the money that we approved in December, they haven't spent 90% of the money, and they have this new pot of money waiting until 2022, 23, and beyond to be spent. So that once again reinforces the lack of vision and discipline that you were talking about earlier, Ann.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the opportunity zones for a minute, because I know you're on a virtual tour of some opportunity zones, and I'd love for you to share with us today about what you've seen, what you think is working well, what could potentially be replicated in other places. I know it looks different around the country, but I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing.
You know, interestingly enough, opportunity zones have been used in a bipartisan fashion. I have very liberal mayors from Birmingham to Los Angeles that's taking advantage of the opportunity zones. In South Carolina, there's been new theaters opened up in public-private partnerships. There's a new tech corridor in Charleston. Erie, Pennsylvania, they're doing more work as well through opportunity zones. In Colorado, they're using the rural landscape to create inventive ways to use their opportunity zones. In Memphis, Tennessee, there's almost $1 billion HBCU collaboration happening, HBCU being historically Black colleges and universities, working with a larger group of private folks as well to see $915 million invested there. There's a housing project on south of Chicago, 3,300 units. In Dallas, I understand that there's a group with a $400 million public-private partnership working on projects. So we're seeing a lot of real estate was the first, I think, first easy rung of the ladder. Now we're seeing job creators coming in and creating jobs, sustainable housing, working on some in New Hampshire and in Iowa. They're working on opioid addiction and getting people back to work. It's been phenomenal to see what people are doing across the country.
When it's going well, what do you see in that local ecosystem that gets it? You're like, oh yeah, they're onto something.
Yes.
I have more confidence that they're going to potentially have that vision or discipline. Or what do you see happening locally when it's
classic? Yes, and one of the classic examples is in Hampton, South Carolina, where they're having an agricultural tech center, and what they're basically doing is a hydroponic development. They're able to grow cabbage and lettuce and tomatoes indoors, which allows us to then export that around the country and around the world. And it's a very competitive way of growing the things that we need and feeding our country. That is a classic example of taking a rural landscape plus the farming plus a competitive edge from a global market and producing year-round in a very safe and healthy environment. So we're seeing that happen, and because of that, we're seeing housing change, education systems changing. We're seeing a radical transformation of some of the landscape. That one project created more jobs, over 1,500 permanent jobs, than that county created over the last decade.
That's amazing when you start to see the ripple effects coming across the community that go beyond the project. One of the things you've said is that you think education is the closest thing to magic that we have in America, which I think is an interesting and an interesting way to come at it. So when you say that, what sort of policies are in your mind when that create that kind of magic and opportunity for kids? What does that look like?
Well, I said that for a couple of reasons. As a kid who almost failed out of school, as a freshman in high school, I basically flunked out. My mother had to encourage me with a Southern apparatus called a switch at that time. And so I got my act together. But I realized very quickly that as a child I went to 4 different elementary schools by the 4th grade. There's a transient nature in poverty. Having quality education in every zip code is the closest thing to magic. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to encourage public school choice, like charters and magnet schools, as well as private school choice. Catholic schools do a fantastic job. Other religious and parochial schools are really proving that the poorest kids in this nation can learn at the same level as any other child in this nation, given the right apparatus. We have excellent success stories from Success Academy in New York City, to work at the Meeting Street Academy in Charleston and Spartanburg, South Carolina. We are proving that our poorest kids with the right education apparatus can far exceed the wildest imagination of today's education experts.
Yes, I think if your goal is how do we give young people opportunity and agency in their futures, what you would design, the education system that would get them there might look very different than what we've created over time. Exactly.
I mean, if you think about it, Ann, that the one place where we need more creativity, more entrepreneurship, is in education. A monopoly typically increases the cost and lowers the outcome. And what we have today in the poor zip codes is a monopoly that is really disenfranchising millions of Americans who will grow up and not have the futures that they could have had they had quality education options within their zip codes. And that's why charter, the way I like to say it is, I don't care if it's a public school, private school, charter school, a home school, a virtual school. Let's get the kid a better education. The more options we give the parents, the better the chance the student has of reaching their full potential. That's good for America, but it's really good for the family.
Absolutely. Well, let's start looking forward a little bit here. This is a really serious time in America. We have real, very complex challenges. And I think all of us as American citizens, what would you advise us? What should we expect from our elected officials, whether they're local, whether they're senators, congresspeople? What should we be expecting of our elected officials as we move forward to those better days?
Well, one of the things I learned from the good book is that servant leadership starts with putting your constituents and your country before yourself. The second thing that we should keep an eye on is on the long-term returns for our nation, not the immediate gratification. And then we have to design policies that move us to that future as quickly but as sustainably as possible. And when I think about that incentive-based economy, that's wiring our economic future to incentives like tax breaks and tax benefits for doing the right thing. It includes seeing ways to fund education choice for those poorest students in the land. It's allowing things and policies like opportunity zones to continue to thrive and to be vibrant, to attract capital into the most distressed communities in our country. It would include a reset of our regulatory system so as not to burden capital and not to burden job creators, but to set them free. Because in the end, we have to make sure that the future of work includes this new virtual opportunity. That means our infrastructure has to include broadband. And if we start off with the premise, as I said much earlier in our discussion, that the best is yet to come, the question is, can you go to the year 2030 and design it back to 2021? That's what I've been working on for the last few years. I started in 2018, my America 2030 plan that focuses on education, the pillars of work, and then the outcomes of an incentive-based economy. If we keep doing the things that we know work long-term, the storms that come, when the wind blows and the water rises, the house will be able to stand. You have to build it right from the foundation. You get that right, we will be able to stand the storms that will come our way because they're coming.
Yep, inevitably, the storms inevitably come. All right, so I'll ask you one last question here as we wrap up. It's easy to get disillusioned or disheartened in these times when it feels like everybody's against everybody else. And I'd love for you to tell us what's giving you hope right now. What's giving you hope about America right now?
Well, one of the things that gives me the greatest hope is, frankly, my own personal odyssey. I was a poor kid who could not find my way. I had my mother, my mentor, and then mentors who saw something in me that I could not see in myself. The blessing of life is that we all have a chance to pay it forward and pay it back. And so when I look around, I think about friends like a guy named Ben Navarro, who is spending probably $30 to $40 million of his own capital, his own money, in proving that poor kids can learn. I think about the unsung heroes that show up at work at nursing homes, who are certified nursing assistants, similar to my mom, who go into harm's way and they work their butts off because they want to keep their patients healthy. I think about the clerk who shows up to put the food on the grocery shelves. No one's celebrating that person. I think about the janitor who comes in every single day and does work so that his child or his family or her family can have a better future. I think about the past and all the challenges and the crisis that we faced and how much better off we are. If we do this crisis right, if we keep our eyes on the prize long term, this will be another very important plank in the education of the greatest country ever assembled on God's green earth. And by doing so, we will one day wake up to a very bright day, and we will still be the light on the hill, the city that brings hope to the rest of the world. That's kind of how I try to remind myself of that almost every day.
Well, that's great. I think that can't get better than that. We'll end it on that note. But thank you so much, Senator Scott, for joining us, for sharing what your perspective, what you see happening in the world and in our country, and we really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Take care of yourself, Ann. We'll hope to see you soon.
Sounds good. All right. We'll let you grade your own papers. Who got all three of the cues when you were listening to the conversation? I hope you left that conversation feeling as optimistic and smarter. That's how I did when I finished talking to Senator Scott when I was reflecting on our work, and I hope that carried through to you all.